That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The wind cut through the empty parking lot like a dull blade, carrying the faint scent of pine from the wreaths strung along the mall's faded facade. It was the kind of December dawn in rural Nevada, where the sky hung low and grey, pressing down on the flat expanse of asphalt that stretched toward the horizon. Engines idled in the distance, a low rumble from the Iron Hawk's convoy pulling into the outskirts after a long haul from Reno. They weren't here for trouble, just a pit stop, a chance to stretch legs numb from the saddle and grab coffee before the next leg south. But the air felt heavier than usual, laced with the metallic tang of impending rain and something unspoken, like regret left too long in the sun. Finn sat on the curb outside the all-night diner attached to the mall, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. Steam rose in lazy curls, but it did little to warm the chill seeping through his leather jacket. At 42, he looked every bit the road-weary rider. Salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with lines from too many miles and too few words. His bike, a battered Harley with the Iron Hawk's emblem, a hawk's wing curved like a shield, leaned nearby, its chrome dulled by dust. He wasn't the club's president, but he rode point often enough. His quiet authority earned through years of pulling brothers from ditches, literal and otherwise. Today, though, his mind wasn't on the road. It was on the envelope tucked in his inner pocket. The one from the hospital back in Boise, stamped with words that blurred in his memory, custody hearing postponed. His daughter, Lena, 8 years old, with eyes like her mother's, waited there with a foster family while he scraped together proof he was more than the ghost the court saw. A single dad, they called him. Unfit, some whispered. But Finn knew better. He knew the weight of promises kept in silence. Inside the diner, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over Formica counters, scarred from years of restless hands. Maggie, the waitress with laugh lines deep as canyons, poured refills for a couple of truckers hunched over plates of eggs. She was in her 50s, widowed young, raising a boy alone until the cancer took him 2 winters back. Her shifts blurred into one another, a rhythm of clinking spoons and murmured orders. But this morning, her eyes lingered on the mall entrance across the lot. The holiday rush hadn't hit yet. The place was a ghost town of twinkling lights and empty storefronts, save for the janitor who shuffled in early to sweep up the night's debris. His name was Elias, a quiet immigrant from the old country. His English halting, but his work ethic ironclad. He pushed his mop in slow arcs, the water sloshing softly against the tiles, unaware of the eyes that would soon turn on him. Finn drained his mug, the bitter dregs coating his tongue, and stood. The other hawks, Jax, with his tattooed arms folded like armor, and Rico, ever the mechanic, tinkering with a loose chain on his bike, nodded as he crossed the lot. They knew the drill, keep it low-key, eyes open. The club wasn't about flash, it was about the code, the unspoken pact that bound them tighter than blood. No one rode alone, and no one left a brother behind. But Finn's steps faltered at the mall doors, pulled by the faint chime of bells from within. Lena had begged for a Santa visit last Christmas before everything unraveled. He wasn't one for holidays, but the pull was there, a quiet ache in his chest. The mall's interior was a dim cavern of echoes, holiday decorations half-assembled like forgotten dreams. Strings of lights dangled from the rafters, casting erratic shadows on the polished floor. Elias was there, near the central atrium where a makeshift Santa's village was taking shape, a throne of faux velvet, elves' workshops in plywood. He hummed under his breath, a melody from Helsinki streets he hadn't seen in decades, as he wiped down the edges of the setup. His hands, rough from years of labor, moved with a gentleness that belied their strength. No one noticed him much. Janitors were shadows in places like this, cleaning up after the world's mess without a word of thanks. Then came the Santa, striding in with a bellow that shattered the quiet. Harold, they called him, a local realtor moonlighting for extra cash, his beard synthetic and his belly padded just enough. He was all bluster, the kind of man who filled silences with noise to avoid his own. Spotting Elias near the throne, he froze, his face twisting into a scowl. "Hey you, janitor, what the hell are you doing touching that? This is for kids, not some unfit drifter mucking it up." The words landed like gravel, sharp and unyielding. Elias straightened slowly, his mop handle creaking in his grip, eyes downcast. He opened his mouth, but only a murmur emerged, thick with accent. Clean, no harm." Finn had just stepped through the doors, the chill from outside clinging to his boots, when he heard it. The air thickened, the hum of distant engines outside fading against the sudden tension. Harold puffed up, jabbing a finger. "Speak English, man. We don't need your kind scaring the families. Get out before I call security." Elias's shoulders slumped, the mop water pooling at his feet like spilled tears. He wasn't young, wasn't strong in the way that mattered here, just a man far from home, holding on to dignity with trembling hands. Finn's breath caught, a slow inhale that burned his lungs. He'd seen this before. The quick judgment, the easy cruelty masked as concern. His hand flexed at his side, not in anger, but in the quiet resolve that had carried him through wars and losses. The Hawk's code stirred in him. No one hurts those we protect. But this wasn't a brawl. It was something smaller, more human, and all the more cutting for it. He stepped forward, boots echoing softly on the tile, his voice emerging low and steady, laced with a fluency that surprised even him. "Hey, Elias, kaikki kunnossa. Älä anna periksi. Hello, Elias. Everything's fine. Don't give up." The words hung in the air, perfect Finnish, rolling off Finn's tongue like a secret unlocked. Harold blinked, mouth agape. Elias's head snapped up, eyes widening in recognition, a flicker of home in this foreign place. Finn hadn't spoken the language since his mother's death, buried under years of English roads and English regrets. But here, in this sterile hall, it surfaced. A bridge across the silence. The mall's lights flickered once, as if the world itself paused, waiting for what came next. The fluorescent hum overhead seemed to swell in the aftermath, casting elongated shadows that danced across the atrium floor like hesitant witnesses. Elias's mop clattered softly against the base of the Santa throne, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness of the mall. His eyes, dark and lined with the wear of long migrations, locked onto Finn's face, searching for the impossible, a thread of familiarity in this stranger's steady gaze. The Finnish words lingered between them, a fragile echo from winters far colder than Nevada's chill, carrying the scent of saunas and pine smoke that Elias hadn't tasted in 20 years. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, his calloused fingers tightening around the mop handle as if it were a lifeline. "Kiitos," he murmured, the word barely audible, laced with a gratitude that cracked the air like thin ice. Harold, the Santa for hire, recovered with a sputter, his padded belly heaving as he jabbed a finger toward Finn. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your business, buddy. And what was that gibberish? You with him?" His voice bounced off the plywood elves and half-strung garlands, drawing a few early-morning stragglers from the shadows, a security guard nursing a thermos by the escalator, a shop clerk fumbling with keys at a distant boutique. Eyes turned, whispers threading through the quiet like smoke. Finn didn't flinch, his posture unchanging, boots planted firm on the cool tile that still held the night's dampness. He could feel the weight of his jacket, the Iron Hawk's patch a subtle emblem on his back, the kind that invited stares and assumptions before words even formed. Outside, through the glass doors smudged with condensation, the convoy's engines ticked down to silence, the desert wind whispering against the bike's frames. Jax leaned against his own ride, arms crossed, his tattooed knuckles scarred from a bar fight he'd ended before it began, always the protector, the one who mended what broke. Rico crouched nearby, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that smelled of oil and earth, his quiet eyes scanning the lot for any ripple of trouble. They weren't here to storm in. The Hawks rode by a code etched deeper than ink, one that valued the long view over the quick spark. But Finn's signal, a subtle tilt of his head through the door, had them alert, shadows ready to move if the wind shifted wrong. Finn met Harold's glare with a calm that bordered on sorrow, his voice low, carrying the gravel of miles unspoken. Just passing through, saw a man doing his job, getting stepped on for it. Thought someone should say something. He glanced at Elias, who had resumed his slow sweeps, the mop gliding in arcs that spoke of routine endurance. The janitor's face, weathered like old leather, held no anger, only a quiet resignation, the kind born from borders crossed and welcomes worn thin. Finn knew that look. It mirrored his own in courtrooms and foster home visits, where his leathers and road dust painted him as the villain before he could speak. The security guard shuffled closer now, his radio crackling faintly at his hip, the scent of stale coffee wafting from his uniform. He was a local, mid-40s, with a paunch that strained his belt and eyes that darted nervously between the biker and the Santa. "Everything all right here, Mr. Harold? Mall policy, no disruptions before opening." His tone was cautious, the word biker unspoken but heavy in the air, conjuring images of revving engines and midnight runs that the town whispered about over diner counters. Finn felt it, the familiar chill of judgment, like rain slicking asphalt under headlights. The Ironhawks weren't outlaws in the storybook sense. No heists, no vendettas, but to eyes like these, they were ghosts on the fringe, leather-clad specters who brought chaos to quiet places. Harold puffed up again, seizing the moment. "This guy's harassing my setup, and his friend's some foreigner messing with the kids' area. Call the cops if you have to." He gestured wildly at Elias, who paused mid-swipe, water dripping in rhythmic plinks that echoed like a slowing heartbeat. The janitor's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back a lifetime's worth of swallowed retorts. He'd come to America chasing work after his wife passed in a Helsinki hospital, leaving him with nothing but memories and a green card that felt more like a tether than a ticket. Sweeping malls from Reno to Vegas, he sent what little he earned back to a sister in the old country, her letters filled with news of nieces he might never meet. Unfit, Harold had called him, a word that stung deeper than any slur, echoing the forms he'd filled out for visas, the interviews where his accent became a barrier thicker than walls. Finn's jaw tightened. A subtle shift that Jax would have caught from across the lot, the signal for readiness, but he held back, his breath steady, inhaling the faint mix of pine cleaner and distant fryer grease from the diner. "No one's harassing anyone," he said evenly, stepping just close enough to Elias to offer silent solidarity, a barrier of presence without threat. "Elias here's keeping this place ready for the families. That's more than some do around here." The words weren't a challenge, but they landed with quiet weight, reframing the scene in the dim light. The security guard hesitated, his hand hovering near his radio, caught in the moral grey where assumptions clashed with the evidence of his eyes. A biker speaking up, not for glory, but for a man overlooked. Elias glanced up then, his dark eyes meeting Finn's for a lingering second, a spark of connection passing unspoken. In that gaze, Finn saw fragments of his own fractured path. The years after his wife's accident, when he'd traded a steady job in Boise for the road, pulling shifts with the Hawks to fund lawyers and appeals. Lena's laughter haunted him still, a ghost in the hum of his engine, her drawings of Santa tucked in his saddlebag like talismans. He'd learned Finnish from his mother, an immigrant who scrubbed floors in Seattle until her hands bled, teaching him that language was a shield, not a sword. Speaking it now felt like unearthing buried roots, a reminder that strength lay in the small acts, the ones that bridged divides without fanfare. The mall stirred faintly around them, the first shoppers' cars crunching gravel in the lot, headlights cutting through the grey dawn. Harold deflated slightly, muttering about schedules as he retreated to adjust his beard in a nearby mirror. The security guard backed off, radio silent, his judgment suspended in the awkward pause. Finn nodded to Elias, a gesture as simple as a handshake unspoken. "Take care of yourself," he said in English this time, the words carrying the warmth of shared exile. Elias managed a faint smile, the lines around his mouth softening, and returned to his work, the mop's swish resuming like a heartbeat steadying. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the glass doors and carrying the low murmur of the Hawks regrouping. Finn stepped back into the chill, the envelope in his pocket feeling heavier, a reminder of his own battles. The town would talk, of course, the biker who spoke tongues, the janitor spared a scene. But in the quiet spaces between, something had shifted, a thread of compassion woven into the fabric of the morning. The desert stretched endless beyond the mall, roads waiting to unspool secrets, and Finn mounted his bike with the weight of it all settling like dust on his shoulders. The engine roared to life, a deep thrum that vibrated through his bones, pulling him forward into the day that was only beginning to unfold. The desert sun clawed its way over the horizon, painting the mall's parking lot in hues of burnt orange and shadow, the kind of light that made everything feel exposed, raw. Finn's bike hummed beneath him as he idled at the edge of the lot, the engine's vibration a steady pulse against the tension coiling in his chest. Elias had vanished back into the mall's depths, his mop trailing faint streaks of water that caught the emerging glow like veins of silver. Harold, the Santa, had slunk off to fuss with his setup, his bluster deflated into muttered complaints that echoed faintly through the glass doors. The security guard lingered by the entrance, thermos in hand, his gaze flicking between the retreating figure and the cluster of bikes, as if weighing whether to note the incident in his log or let it dissolve into the morning's haze. Finn cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the wind's low whistle through the pines strung with faded lights. Jax approached from the diner's side, his boots crunching on loose gravel, the scent of cooling metal and coffee clinging to him. "Everything square in there?" he asked, voice low, his eyes scanning Finn's face for the tells, the subtle tightening of the jaw, the distant stare. Jax was the club's anchor, a former welder from Oregon who'd lost his leg below the knee in a factory mishap, trading sparks for the road's uncertain rhythm. He rode with a prosthetic that clicked faintly under leather, a reminder of pains endured without complaint. The Hawks had pulled him in during a rain-soaked breakdown years back. No questions, just a tow and a shared meal. Loyalty like that didn't need words. It lived in the spaces between revs and rests. "Yeah," Finn replied, swinging a leg over the saddle, his boots hitting the asphalt with a soft thud. The envelope in his pocket shifted, a paperweight against his ribs, reminding him of Lena's latest letter, scrawled in crayon, asking when Daddy would be home for pancakes. He hadn't told the brothers about the custody fight, not fully. The Hawks knew pieces, enough to cover shifts when he rode to hearings, but the full ache stayed buried, like gravel under tires. Just some fool running his mouth. Janitor took it in stride. He paused, the Finnish words still echoing in his mind, a melody from childhood summers visiting his mother's family, where language wove through forests thick with secrets, Speaking it to Elias had felt like cracking open a door long sealed, letting in light he hadn't realized was missing. Rico joined them, wiping his hands on his jeans, the rag in his pocket stained with the black kiss of engine oil. He was the quiet one, a mechanic with hands that could coax life from dead machines. His own story etched in the scars from a border crossing gone wrong. Smuggled from Mexico as a teen, building a life in garages from Tucson to Tahoe. "Heard the tail end," Rico said, nodding toward the mall. "You know the guy?" His accent was soft, blended years of English with the lilt of home, a bridge he'd built brick by silent brick. The Hawks weren't a family by blood, but by choice, outcasts who found strength in the margins, defending what the world overlooked. They'd fixed Elias's old truck once, out on Route 95. No charge, just a nod and a shared cigarette under starlit skies. Finn shook his head, but the pull was there, magnetic. "Not really. But I've been where he is. Eyes on you like you're the problem before you open your mouth." He glanced back at the mall, where early lights flickered on inside, illuminating displays of glittering ornaments and stuffed reindeer that seemed almost mocking in their cheer. The air carried the faint brine of rain from the night before, mixing with the piney tang of wreaths, a scent that tugged at memories of Lena's first snowman, her mittened hands patting the base while he watched from the porch, heart full and fracturing. The court saw his leathers, his road miles, and stamped him unfit, a word that burned hotter than desert sun. Elias, with his halting words and worn broom, wore the same invisible brand. Inside, the atrium stirred with the first stirrings of the day. Maggie from the diner had crossed over during her break, her apron dusted with flour, carrying a thermos of hot cocoa for the setup crew. She was a fixture in these parts, her laugh a rare warmth against the chill of solitary shifts. But today her eyes held a quiet worry as she spotted Elias near the Santa throne. He'd paused his work, leaning against a pillar, his breath coming in shallow pulls. The mop bucket overturned beside him. The confrontation had shaken something loose, a tremor in his hands that he tried to steady by gripping the rough wood. Maggie approached softly, her footsteps muffled on the tile, the scent of vanilla from her baking wafting like an offering. "You all right, Elias? Saw that blowhard giving you grief." Her voice was gentle, laced with the compassion of one who'd buried a son and kept serving anyway. Elias nodded, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the middle distance where memories pooled. "Old words," he said, his English careful, each syllable measured like steps on thin ice. "Back home in Finland I teach children math, history, war came, I leave. Here I clean. But heart, it remembers." He straightened slowly, the lines on his face deepening in the atrium's glow, the lights above buzzing like hesitant fireflies. Maggie listened, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a touch that spoke of shared solitudes, the widow and the exile, both navigating worlds that judged before understanding. From the lot, Finn watched through the doors, the glass cool against his palm as he pushed them open again. The Hawks hung back, giving space, their presence a silent guard. He crossed to Elias and Maggie, the air inside warmer, heavy with the artificial spice of cinnamon from a nearby kiosk. "Mind if I join?" Finn asked, his voice threading through the quiet. Elias looked up, surprise softening his features, and gestured to a nearby bench, simple plywood painted red, part of the holiday facade. They sat, the wood creaking under their weight, the mall's vastness amplifying the intimacy of the moment. Maggie poured cocoa into paper cups, steam rising in fragile wisps, and for a time words flowed haltingly. Elias speaking of Helsinki's winters, Finn sharing fragments of his mother's tales, Maggie weaving in stories of her boy's love for the road, how he dreamed of bikes before the illness claimed him. The security guard passed by once, his radio silent now, but he didn't interrupt. his earlier suspicion yielding to the scene's quiet humanity. Outside, the parking lot filled slowly, families pulling in for early shopping, engines cooling with soft ticks. Unaware of the threads connecting strangers in the shadows, Finn felt the envelope again, a talisman of his own unspoken fight, and in Elias's eyes he saw a mirror. Men on the edge, holding fast to dignity amid the judgments. The cocoa warmed his hands, but it was the shared silence that eased the ache, a brief harbor before the road called once more. As the mall doors swung wider with arrivals, Finn stood, clapping Elias lightly on the shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, rough but kind. "Hold the line," he said, the words carrying the weight of the code. Elias nodded, his smile faint but real, the mop resuming its rhythm like a promise renewed. The wind outside tugged at Finn's jacket as he emerged, the sun higher now, casting long shadows that stretched toward the horizon. The hawks mounted up, engines stirring to life in a low chorus, but the morning had planted something, a seed of connection in the barren ground, waiting for rain to break it open. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The midday sun beat down on the mall's roof like a relentless interrogator, turning the parking lot into a shimmering sea of asphalt that warped the air above the bikes. Finn wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the salt stinging the faint scar above his eye, a remnant from a skid on black ice years back, when the road had taught him its first harsh lesson. The Iron Hawks had scattered for the afternoon. Jax heading to the diner's back lot to patch a loose exhaust, Rico scouting a nearby garage for parts, their absence leaving Finn with the quiet itch to move. But the pull of the mall lingered, a magnetic hum beneath the surface, drawing him back inside where the air conditioning hummed cool and artificial, carrying the faint mingled sense of fresh pretzels and polished floors. Elias was at it again, his mop tracing methodical paths near the Santa setup, now bustling with early families. Children tugged at parents' hands, their laughter sharp against the low murmur of conversations, while Harold held court on his throne, his synthetic beard askew from the morning's fuss. The realtor's eyes narrowed as Finn approached the atrium's edge, leaning against a pillar festooned with tinsel that caught the light in dull glints. Finn wasn't here to stir trouble. The code demanded restraint, a measured response to slights that could unravel into something uglier. But watching Elias, head bowed, shoulders rounded under the weight of invisible judgments, stirred the embers of his own buried fire. The janitor moved like a man carrying an anchor, each swipe of the mop a deliberate act of endurance, his face a map of lines etched by displacements Finn could only imagine. Maggie spotted him first, emerging from the diner tunnel with a tray of coffees balanced on one hip, her apron strings tied tight against the small of her back. She'd seen enough transients to read the quiet storm in a man's stance, the way Finn's fingers drummed lightly against his thigh, not in impatience, but in the subtle rhythm of unresolved tension. "Back for more?" she asked, handing him a cup, the steam rising warm against the chill of the interior. Her voice held no judgment, only the worn empathy of someone who'd poured out her own losses over countless refills. Finn took the coffee, the paper sleeve rough against his palm, and nodded toward Elias. "Couldn't shake it. Man's got a story, and that Santa's got no right burying it under his boot." Inside the atrium, the scene thickened. A young mother, her coat dusted with road salt, approached the Santa setup with a toddler in tow, a girl no older than Lena, with wide eyes and a stuffed bear clutched tight. Harold boomed his greetings, but as the child hesitated near Elias's bucket, splashing a curious hand in the soapy water, the Santa's face soured. "Watch it, kid. Don't let that mess get on you. Hey, you!" He jabbed toward Elias again, voice rising over the chatter. "Keep your crap out of the way. This ain't a playground for strays." The words sliced through the hum, drawing stares, the mother pulling her daughter close, a cluster of shoppers pausing mid-stride, their whispers threading like smoke, biker in leathers, janitor with the accent, Santa playing judge. Elias froze, the mop handle slick in his grip, droplets falling in slow, accusatory plinks. His breath came shallow, a faint wheeze that betrayed the asthma he'd picked up from years of chemical cleaners in unventilated spaces. He opened his mouth, but the English faltered, tangled in the knot of old wounds, memories of checkpoints in war-torn borders, where words like unfit had stripped him of home and hearth. The mother shot Harold a glance, her hand trembling slightly on her child's shoulder, but she said nothing, the weight of conformity pressing her silent. Finn felt it coil in his gut, a slow burn of moral friction. Walk away, let the road swallow it, or step in and risk the label of agitator, the one that could torpedo his custody case with one wrong photo in the local paper. He set the coffee down on a nearby ledge, the cup's warmth seeping into the wood, and crossed the floor in measured steps, boots soft on the tile to avoid escalating the echo. The air felt thicker here, laced with the sugary bite of candy canes from a vendor cart and the underlying tang of Elias's cleaner, a mix that turned the stomach. "Easy now," Finn said, his voice low, threading through the tension without raising it. He positioned himself between Harold and Elias, not aggressively, but as a quiet shield, the kind the Hawks used on long rides, blocking wind for a faltering brother. Harold leaned forward on his throne, the faux fur rustling, his eyes flicking to the security guard now hovering at the periphery, radio in hand. "You again? I told you, this is my gig. Take your road rat routine elsewhere before I make a call." The guard advanced, his footsteps heavier, the crackle of his belt gear amplifying in the pause. He was younger up close, early 30s, with the fresh-faced uncertainty of a small-town hire, his uniform crisp, but his eyes darting to the Iron Hawk's patch visible through the doors. "Sir, we can't have disturbances. Mall's got rules." His tone wavered, caught between protocol and the human tableau unfolding. The biker's steady calm, the janitor's downcast gaze, the mother's protective hunch. Finn met his eyes, holding them without challenge, his own breath even, though his pulse thrummed like an idling engine. No disturbance, just a man doing his job, and another making sure it stays that way. He turned slightly to Elias, murmuring in Finnish once more, the words a soft anchor, "Älä pelkää, me seisum rinnallasi." "Don't fear, we stand with you." Elias's hands steadied on the mop, a faint nod the only reply, but in his eyes flickered a spark. Gratitude mingled with the quiet resolve of survival. The mother lingered, her toddler peeking out, and she offered a small smile to Finn, a silent acknowledgement that bridged the divide. Harold huffed, crossing his arms, but the bluster faltered under the growing audience, whispers turning to murmurs of unease. The guard hesitated, hand dropping from his radio, the moment stretching like taffy, heavy with unspoken choices. Finn could feel the pull of the road outside, the bikes waiting like loyal hounds, but leaving now would mean abandoning the fragile line Elias walked, the same one he'd towed in courtrooms where his past as a rider labelled him unfit before Lena's name even crossed the judge's lips. Outside, Jax's wrench clinked faintly against metal, a distant punctuation to the standoff. The wind gusted, rattling garlands and carrying the desert's dry bite through the cracks in the doors. Finn stood firm, the atrium's lights casting his shadow long across the floor, a silhouette of restrained strength amid the holiday gloss. The tension held, a moral precipice where compassion clashed with convenience, and in that suspended breath, the true weight of the morning settled, not in shouts but in the quiet stand of one man for another, the first crack in the facade of judgment that the day would only widen. The atrium's hum fractured under the weight of held breaths, the holiday music piping from overhead speakers, a tinny rendition of Jingle Bells, clashing with the undercurrent of strain, like oil on water. Finn's shadow stretched across the tile, elongated by the atrium lights that buzzed faintly, casting erratic flickers on the faces turned toward him. Elias gripped the mop handle tighter, his knuckles paling against the wood, the soapy water at his feet reflecting distorted glimpses of the scene. The toddler's wide eyes, the mother's hesitant stance, Harold's reddening cheeks beneath the synthetic beard. The security guard's radio crackled once, a static whisper that hung unanswered, his fingers hovering as if the device itself weighed the moral tilt of the moment. Harold shifted on his throne, the faux velvet creaking under him, his voice rising in a pitch that scraped the air. "This is ridiculous. You're all witnesses. This biker's picking a fight in a family place. Guard, do your job." The words landed heavy, pulling more eyes from the periphery. A cluster of shoppers near the pretzel stand, their bags rustling as they paused, whispers threading through the cinnamon-scented haze. One elderly woman clutched her purse strap, her gaze flicking between Finn's leather-clad frame and Elias's bowed head, the unspoken narrative forming in her mind, troublemakers invading the cheer, outcasts disrupting the fragile peace. Finn felt it settle on him like dust from a long ride, the familiar sting of assumption that painted the Hawks as predators before the truth could surface. He didn't move, his breath steady, inhaling the mix of artificial pine and the faint, acrid bite of tension sweat from Harold's direction. Inside, the coil tightened, not rage, but a deeper churn. The kind that echoed his nights poring over custody papers by motel lamplight, Lena's photo propped against the salt shaker. One wrong move here, a viral clip or a cop's report, and the judge's gavel could fall harder, sealing him as the unfit drifter forever. Yet walking away gnawed worse, a betrayal of the code that had saved him when his world shattered, the crash that took his wife. The road that became refuge, the brothers who rode shotgun through the grief. Elias deserved that same shadow, the quiet bulwark against the world's casual cruelty. The guard stepped forward, his boots scuffing the floor, voice pitched low but firm. "Sir, I need you to step back. No more interference." His eyes held a flicker of reluctance, the small-town badge weighing on him like an ill-fit vest. He'd pulled over Hawks before, waved them through with a nod, after seeing the patched vests carry tools for roadside fixes, not malice. But protocol was a chain, pulling him toward the easy out. Finn met his gaze, unblinking, his voice emerging soft, threaded with the gravel of restraint. Interference. Or just making sure a man's not ground underfoot for speaking his piece. He glanced at the mother, her toddler now hidden behind her legs, the stuffed bear's button eyes peering out. She shifted, lips parting as if to speak, but the moment stretched, silent justice hanging in the balance. Elias exhaled slowly, the sound ragged in the pause, his free hand pressing against his chest where the wheeze lingered. The mop bucket tilted slightly, water sloshing in a soft lap that mirrored the turmoil. He'd endured worse. Soviet-era interrogations in his youth. The border crossings where unfit became a stamp, denying entry, stripping layers of identity until only labor remained. But here, in this fluorescent-lit limbo, the words reopened scars, the vulnerability raw under strangers' stares. Maggie hovered at the edge, her tray balanced like a shield, her face paling as she watched the escalation. She'd lost her boy to a system that labeled him terminal too soon, pouring her compassion into these small battles. But even she felt the pull of retreat, the fear of losing her job for meddling. Outside, the parking lot baked under the climbing sun, engines ticking as they cooled, the desert wind carrying faint echoes of the confrontation through the doors. Jack straightened from his work on the bike, wrench pausing mid-turn, his prosthetic leg shifting with a soft click against the kickstand. He didn't charge in. The Hawks moved as one, deliberate, their loyalty a tide that rose without splash. Rico pocketed his tools, eyes narrowing on the glass, sensing the shift like a fault line in asphalt. They'd seen Finn like this before, the quiet storm before a brother's stand, the kind that forged bonds in the aftermath of dust and decisions. Harold seized the opening, fumbling for his phone on the throne's arm, the screen lighting his face in harsh blue. "Fine, I'll handle it myself. Cops'll sort you out." Biker and his foreign pal, terrorizing the holidays. His thumb hovered over the dial, the threat blooming like a slow leak, the atrium's cheer fracturing further as a child's cry pierced from nearby. A different family, drawn by the tension, pulling away hastily. Finn's hand flexed at his side, not toward Harold, but inward, toward the envelope's edge. Lena's face flashing in his mind. Her trusting smile, the way she'd cling to his leg before the Foster drop-offs, whispering, "Come back soon, Daddy." The revelation simmered unspoken, Elias's isolation mirroring his own, two men judged by surfaces, their hidden depths of fatherhood and loss buried under labels. Speaking Finnish had cracked the door. Now, standing firm, risked slamming it on his own fragile chance at redemption. The guard's radio spat to life, a dispatcher's voice cutting through. "Unit 4, non-emergency at Mall Atrium, possible disturbance." The words hung, decision point sharp as a skid mark. Finn held his ground, the air thick with the scent of cooling coffee from his abandoned cup, the subtle tremor in Elias's breath syncing with his own restrained pulse. Compassion warred with caution, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Protect the vulnerable or preserve the path to his daughter. The mall's vastness amplified the standoff, shadows lengthening as the sun arced higher, the weight of unspoken loyalties pressing down like the desert's endless sky. In that suspended breath, Elias straightened fractionally, his eyes meeting Finn's, a silent pact forged in the margins where outcasts found strength in shared silence. The phone in Harold's hand trembled slightly, the dial unpressed, the tension cresting toward whatever fracture the afternoon would bring. The atrium's tension thickened, like smoke from a dying fire, the holiday music looping into a mocking refrain that underscored the standoff. Finn's boots rooted to the tile, the cool surface seeping through the leather soles, grounding him against the pull of retreat. Harold's thumb pressed the phone's screen, the dial tone emerging faint but insistent, a digital summons that echoed off the high ceilings. The security guard shifted his weight, radio clipped back to his belt with a soft snap, his face a mask of conflicted duty, eyes darting to the growing cluster of onlookers, their murmurs rising like a distant engine rumble. Elias stood motionless beside his overturned bucket, water spreading in a slow, reflective pool that mirrored the fractured lights above, his breath ragged, each inhale a quiet battle against the constriction in his chest. Finn's pulse thrummed steady in his ears, a counterpoint to the atrium's hum, the scent of damp cleaner mingling with the sharp tang of fear sweat from Harold's direction. He could taste the bitterness of his own restraint, the words he swallowed to keep the peace. For Lena, for the fragile thread of his custody appeal that hung by reports of stability, not confrontations. But Elias's vulnerability cracked something deeper, a fissure in the armor he'd built mile by mile. The janitor's eyes, shadowed under heavy brows, held a plea unspoken, echoing the foster workers' gazes when they handed Lena back to him after visits. Her small hand slipping from his with promises of soon. Unfit. The word clawed at him now, not just for himself, but for this stranger who'd crossed oceans only to be diminished in a fluorescent-lit cage. The guard cleared his throat, stepping closer, his voice low but edged with finality. "Last chance, folks. Disperse or we escalate." His hand rested on his belt, not threatening, but present, a reminder of lines drawn in small-town sand. The mother with the toddler edged away, her coat brushing Finn's arm in passing, leaving a faint whiff of baby powder and hesitation. She paused at the periphery, glancing back, her expression a mix of sympathy and self-preservation, the kind that whispered of her own margins. Perhaps a single shift worker, scraping by in a trailer on the outskirts, knowing the cost of speaking up. Harold smirked from his throne, the phone held aloft like a trophy, his voice booming over the hush. Too late for that. Dispatch? Yeah, we've got a disruption. Biker causing a scene with the cleaning guy. Get here quick. The dispatcher's acknowledgement crackled back, tinny and urgent, sending a ripple through the crowd. Whispers swelled. Those riders outside. Trouble follows them, one shopper muttered to another, bags crinkling in nervous grips. Elias's hand trembled on the mop, the wood slick with residue, and he leaned against the pillar for support, his wheeze audible now, a laboured pull that cut through the noise like a faltering exhaust. Finn moved instinctively, one step to steady him, his palm hovering near Elias's elbow without touching. The code's touchstone. Support without invasion. Easy, he murmured in English, then softer, in Finnish. Pisi rauhallisena, autan sinua. Stay calm, I'll help you. Elias's gaze lifted, locking onto Finn's with an intensity that pierced the chaos, his dark eyes widening as recognition dawned, not of the face but of the timbre, the rolling vowels that bridged decades. The janitor's breath hitched, a pause heavy with memory, and he whispered, Sinä, sinun äänesi, vuosikymmenet sitten, sodan jälkeen. You, your voice. Decades ago, after the war. The words tumbled out, halting but fervent, pulling Finn into a vortex of revelation. Elias straightened fractionally, the mop forgotten, his free hand gesturing faintly as fragments surfaced. A refugee camp on the Finnish border, 1952, where a young American aid worker, Finn's father, a veteran turned volunteer, had distributed rations and blankets, his voice a steady anchor in the cold. Hän puhui suomea, oppi meiltä. Poika seurasi pieni, hiljainen. Sinäkö se olit? Finn froze, the atrium blurring at the edges, the crowd's murmurs fading to a distant roar. His father, dead these 15 years from the cancer that ate him slow, leaving Finn with stories of those post-war runs, teaching him Finnish phrases over kitchen tables in Boise. Minä olin lapsi silloin, Finn replied, the language flowing unbidden, raw with the weight of unearthed roots. I was a child then. The connection snapped into place. Reframing the morning's fragments, the instinctive words to Elias, the shared exile, now bound by bloodlines crossed in history's shadow. Elias's face softened, lines easing as tears welled, unspoken grief for a saviour long gone, mirrored in Finn's own ache. The father who'd instilled the code of quiet aid, now echoed in this stand against casual cruelty. The revelation hung between them, a bridge over the moral chasm as Harold's call connected fully, his bluster peaking. Yes, now, get someone here. But the guard held up a hand, eyes flicking to the exchange, sensing the shift in the air, thick now with something profound, human. The mother returned a step, toddler in arms, her voice breaking the hush. Wait, this isn't right. The janitor's not hurting anyone. So Maggie's tray clattered as she set it down, joining the circle, her presence a quiet reinforcement. Outside, Jack's and Rico's engines stirred faintly, a low growl of readiness, but they held, trusting Finn's lead. Elias gripped Finn's arm then, the touch frail but fervent, his wheeze steadying in the warmth of recognition. Kiitos, poika. Isäsi. Hän pelasti minut. Thank you, son. Your father. He saved me. Finn nodded, throat tight, the envelope in his pocket burning like a brand. Lena's future intertwined now with this past, a redemption arc bending toward forgiveness. The crowd's judgment wavered, whispers turning to questions, the silent justice of connection unraveling Harold's narrative. The guard lowered his hand, radio silent, as sirens wailed distant. approaching but altered by the truth's quiet emergence. In that moment, the atrium's light steadied, casting a softer glow on faces reframed, not villains and victims, but survivors linked by hidden threads, the weight of loyalty lifting the unspoken guilt that had shadowed Finn's road. The desert wind gusted through the cracked doors, carrying the promise of rain, as the revelation settled like dust after a storm, binding outcasts in a tapestry of second chances. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Finn reach more people who still believe in humanity. The sirens wailed closer, a distant keen slicing through the atrium's suspended hush, but the sound felt muted, as if the desert itself swallowed the urgency, leaving only the soft patter of Elias's labored breaths and the faint drip from his mop bucket. Finn stood unmoving, his hand still near Elias's arm, the contact a fragile tether in the cooling air that seeped from the doors. The revelation lingered between them, like smoke from a banked fire, warming the chill of judgment that had gripped the morning. Elias's eyes, rimmed with the gloss of unshed tears, held Finn's without flinching now, the weight of decades bridging the gap. Father's legacy to son's stand, a quiet inheritance of compassion forged in war's aftermath. Harold slumped back on his throne, the phone slipping from his fingers to clatter against the faux fur, his face paling under the synthetic beard as the crowd's murmurs shifted, turning from accusation to uneasy curiosity. The security guard exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing, the radio at his hip falling silent as he scanned the scene. Not a brawl, but a tableau of human threads unraveling old knots. "Dispatch, stand down," he muttered into the device, voice low and steady, the words carrying the relief of a line not crossed. The mother with the toddler lingered at the edge, her child's small hand clutching her coat, and she nodded faintly to Finn, a gesture of silent solidarity that spoke volumes in the atrium's vast quiet. Maggie hovered nearby, her tray forgotten on a bench, her lined face softening with the kind of forgiveness that comes from witnessing redemption unfold in real time. Outside, the parking lot shimmered under the climbing sun, the Iron Hawk's bikes gleaming like sentinels in the haze, their engines long cooled but ready to stir at a whisper. Jax leaned against his ride, arms folded, his tattooed skin catching the light in subtle patterns of scars and ink, marks of survivals shared, loyalties earned in the margins where law fell short. Rico pocketed his wrench with a soft clink, his dark eyes reflecting the glass doors, sensing the resolution without needing details. The club didn't rush in. Their justice was patient, woven into the fabric of rides taken together, breakdowns mended under starless skies, the unspoken pact that no one stood alone against the world's indifferent grind. Finn helped Elias to the bench, the wood creaking under their combined weight, the air thick with the scent of spilled cleaner and the faint underlying brine of impending rain. Elias's wheeze eased into a rhythmic sigh, his hand pressing against his chest as if to still a fluttering heart. "Your father," he said softly, the English careful but infused with the warmth of memory. "He gave me blanket in camp, taught words, hope, in your tongue. Now you give it back." Finn nodded, throat tight, the envelope in his pocket a tangible reminder of his own fragile hopes. Lena's face surfaced in his mind, her 8-year-old grin lighting the dim foster rooms, her questions about Daddy's long absences met with promises he strained to keep. The courts saw the road dust, the leathers, the nights away. They didn't see the father who'd learned Finnish lullabies to soothe her fevers, the man who'd traded stability for survival after the accident that shattered their world. The sirens crested and faded, diverted by the guard's call, leaving the atrium to exhale into normalcy. Shoppers resumed their paths, footsteps echoing softly on the tile, the holiday music swelling once more in a gentle loop that masked the earlier fracture. Harold rose awkwardly from his throne, muttering about schedules as he adjusted his beard, his eyes avoiding the group. The bluster drained like air from a punctured tire. He shuffled toward the back, leaving the Santa setup half-shadowed, the plywood elves standing sentinel over the quiet victory. The mother approached then, her toddler peeking out, and offered Elias a small package from her bag, a candy cane wrapped in cellophane, its red stripe vivid against the muted tones. "For keeping things nice," she said, voice barely above a whisper, her hand trembling slightly with the vulnerability of the act. Elias accepted it with a nod, the crinkle of plastic a soft punctuation, his fingers brushing hers in a moment of shared humanity that needed no translation. Finn watched, the scene imprinting like a photograph in fading light, the atrium's fluorescence casting a warm halo over the exchange. He'd come here chasing ghosts of holidays past, Lena's pleas for Santa echoing in his saddlebag, but found instead a mirror to his own concealed battles. The single dad labelled unfit, the rider dismissed as drifter, the son carrying a father's quiet code. Speaking Finnish hadn't just defended Elias. It had unlocked something in himself, a forgiveness for the miles that kept him from home, a loyalty that extended beyond blood to the outcasts who peopled the road's edges. The Hawks embodied that. Not rebels against the law, but guardians of the overlooked, their brotherhood a community where second chances were revved into life, one act at a time. As the sun dipped toward afternoon, casting long shadows across the lot, Finn stood clapping Elias's shoulder lightly, the leather of his jacket whispering against the janitor's worn shirt. "Road calls," he said. The words heavy with the pull of horizons, but lighter now, unburdened by the morning's weight. Elias rose with him, steadier, the candy cane tucked in his pocket like a talisman. "Kitos istava," he replied. "Thank you, friend." The vowels rolling soft, a bridge enduring. Maggie joined them at the doors, her smile faint but real, the scent of diner coffee clinging to her apron. "Come back for pancakes sometime," she offered, her voice laced with the compassion of survivors recognizing kin. Finn stepped into the wind, the desert air crisp with the promise of storm, carrying the faint ozone tang that heralded change. The Hawks mounted up as one, engines humming to life in a low, harmonious rumble that vibrated through the asphalt, pulling them toward the open road. Elias watched from the threshold, his silhouette framed by twinkling lights, a nod of farewell that spoke of forgiveness found in unexpected places. Finn glanced back once, the mall shrinking in his mirrors, the envelope in his pocket feeling less like a chain and more like a map, to Lena, to redemption, to the humanity that pulsed beneath the leather and dust. In the quiet miles ahead, where engines cooled under starlit skies and loyalties whispered louder than words, the road stretched on, a silent testament to hearts that mended what the world broke. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Mall Santa called the Janitor Unfit. Seconds later, the single dad spoke in perfect Finnish. See you in the next one.